Well, I want to tell you a little story, and this is just to test and just to see how good Alan is at forgiving. There we go. Because you see, I've known Alan for quite a long time now, because I actually, when I first came here 13 years ago now, so it's a long, long time back, my house wasn't quite ready, and so Alan and his brother here, David, Aunt Maureen, gave me some lodgings for a few weeks, and so I stayed in the house. And Alan and David used to come and stay from time to time, and there was one particular incident when Alan and David were staying, and there was some fuss going on that I could hear, and I wasn't particularly, I was downstairs reading a book or the paper or something, and this fuss was going, I could hear it all going on upstairs. And then Auntie Maureen came down and she said to me, Keith, she said, would you be able to come and just move a spider? And I went upstairs, and there in the bathroom, right in the bath, was this giant spider. Now, I know that my memory might not be quite as good as it was, but I think it was about that big. It certainly looked like about that size. And you know what? Alan and David wouldn't go near it. They were petrified of a little spider. I mean, only that big. So I had to do it. So I had to take this little spider, capture it, and take it outside, just like any brave man would do. The truth is, of course, I wasn't really that brave, but I had to be, didn't I, just to keep face. So, because I absolutely hate spiders as well, particularly when they're that size. You know, and you know, I mean, I kind of lived in a house full of people. When I was growing up, I've got three brothers, sisters, two brothers, one sister, and particularly my younger brother. I mean, he loved any creepy, crawly thing. So if there was ever a spider around, we used to call him Ian, spider, and he used to get, so, of course, I'd never really done this before. And so I had to sort of confront a fear to go and take the spider and get rid of it. And now, of course, it's no problem at all. I mean, all I do now is I look at the spider and I say to Lisa, Lisa, there's a spider there. You need to learn how to confront spiders. You can go and take that one out for me. And so we get around it that way now. So, but confronting fears is something that we need to do sometimes, isn't it? And we've all got fears that we have. And one of the fears that many people have is that of saying, I follow Jesus. And that can be a big barrier for some of us. Because, well, being a follower of Jesus isn't particularly fashionable anymore. And so it can be difficult. Lots of people would laugh at us if we said we're a follower of Jesus. So in actual fact, being a follower of Jesus is a brave thing to do. Not just because some people laugh, but also because we're a minority. And by minority, it means we're the smallest group, or one of the smaller groups. There are lots of people who have different opinions to us, and they're much bigger groups of people. And when there's a lot of people think one thing, it's very difficult for the small group to still stand up and say, I still believe what I believe. But I'm really delighted that Alan is taking this step, because this is a very public way of saying I'm a follower of Jesus. And it's not easy to do it. And anyone who's ever been baptized will know that, when you get into the water, no matter how hot that water is, and believe me, sometimes it's like boiling point, or it seems like that, your teeth still chatter. But it's not the cold, it's just that it's such a dramatic thing to be doing. And so we want to just say to Alan that we think you're a brave man, despite the fact that you don't like spiders. Maybe that's changed now, but at least he's honest. It's a brave thing to do, Alan, and we just want to support you and to help you now and into the future as well as you do that. And just to say to anybody else who's kind of sitting there thinking, shan't I? If you're thinking, shall I follow Jesus, shan't I follow him? I just urge you, it doesn't matter about being the minority, it doesn't matter what other people think. Doesn't matter how scary it might seem to be. Just encourage you to do just that. We're going to have a reading, and it's from the book of Romans and from chapter 6 and the first 14 verses. And Elaine is going to come and read it to us this morning. Thank you, Elaine.
What should we say? Should we keep on sinning so that God's wonderful kindness will show up even better? No, we should not. If we are dead to sin, how can we go on sinning? Don't you know that all who share in Christ Jesus by being baptized also share in his death? When we were baptized, we were died and were buried with Christ. We were baptized so that we would live a new life, as Christ was raised to life by the glory of God the Father. If we shared in Jesus' death by being baptized, we will be raised to life with him. We know that the persons we used to be were nailed to the cross with Jesus. This was done so that our sinful bodies would no longer be the slaves of sin. We know that sin doesn't have power over dead people. As surely as we died with Christ, we believe we will also live with him. We know that death no longer has any power over Christ. He died and was raised to life, never again to die. When Christ died, he died for sin once and for all. But now he is alive and he lives only for God. In the same way, you must think of yourselves as dead to the power of sin, but Christ Jesus has given life to you and you live for God. Don't let sin rule your body. After all, your body is bound to die, so don't obey its desires, or let any part of it become a slave to evil. Give yourselves to God as people who have been raised from death to life. Make every part of your body a slave that pleases God. Don't let sin keep ruling your lives. You are ruled by God's kindness and not by the law.
Thanks very much, Elaine. Just want to talk to you for a few minutes about baptism in pictures. Okay, I'll call it baptism in pictures. Now, we've got some PowerPoint slides coming up, and I'm wondering actually if it's going to be better if I just kind of turn to the side slightly, and then I can see what's going on over there without having to crick my neck too much. Baptism in pictures. Pictures, you know, they're such a wonderful thing that we can use, aren't they? Because pictures say so much more than words can ever say. They say so much more. I'm going to give you a test. Are you ready for a little game with me? Can you girls, can you see the screen from there? Can you see that? That's good. Because what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to put up some pictures. And it's just you know, there are some very famous stories, okay, behind these pictures. And when you see the picture, I want you to see if you know what the story is that the picture is trying to tell. And let's see how quickly the picture can tell the story. Okay, let's have the first one. Right, if you can see that one, have a good look at it. Lucia thinks she knows. What do you think it is, Lucia? Jack and the Beanstalk. I think that was in 0.5 of a second. Okay, Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay, here's the second one. Okay, what's this one? And so, yes, sir? The Three Billy Goats Gruff. There we go. There's the second one. You see, and again, 0.5 of a second. And we're able to get the three bitty goats gruff from that one. Okay, let's have another picture. Right. Oh, okay, on, sir. Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, and I think that was in half the time that the others took. So, okay, do you see how easy it is from a picture? Straight away, and most of us will know the story of the three bitty goats gruff, or Little Red Riding Hood, or Jack and the Beanstalk, or whatever it might be. The pictures tell them so quickly. Let's have another one. What's that one telling the story of? A little bit harder, but we think, actually, let's go. We've got Rachel. The Good Samaritan. It's a story that Jesus told, isn't it? Of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus was really good at telling stories that put wonderful pictures into our minds. And he called them, or we call them, parables, the stories that Jesus told. And he had lots of people sitting around him listening very often, and he would tell these stories. And as he told the stories, he didn't have the luxury of PowerPoint as we've got, but he would tell a story and paint the picture in their minds. Sometimes he would use an object. So on one occasion, he wanted to make a point, so he said to them, have you got a coin? And they gave him a coin, and he said, whose head is on the coin? And they looked at the coin, and they said, it's Caesar's head is on the coin. Today we'd have the Queen's head, wouldn't we, in this country? But then they had Caesar's head. And he said, then you better pay to Caesar the taxes that you owe him, because the coin belongs to him. Another occasion, he wanted to make a point, so he took a little tiny child, and he had the child stand in front of him as a visual lesson for everyone. And he said, unless you become like one of these little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus did sometimes use objects, and he was great at telling stories. And in that way, the people said, isn't he brilliant? Because we understand what he's talking about. And Jesus was so good at just getting his message across. Let's go on to our next slide. So I want to ask the question today, because this is about baptism, that why should we be baptized? And I think that baptism is all about painting pictures for us, that we can see something really good. So why should we be baptized? Let's have a look at the first answer we could give. Because Jesus was baptized. Jesus went to the River Jordan, and we read that right at the start of our service today, that Jesus went down to the River Jordan, and there was a man there called John, and they didn't have a surname. Sometimes we have a last name, or sometimes we all do, don't we? We all have last names today. So my name is Mitchell, but John wasn't Mitchell, he was baptized, or Baptist. So he was called John the Baptist, okay? And because he would baptize people, and he was baptizing people in a dirty river. And Jesus came along and said, John, I need to be baptized by you. And John said, no way, he said. It should be the other way round. You are Jesus, and I'm just John the Baptist. You should baptize me. And Jesus said, no. And John kept saying, but why not? And Jesus gave a very simple answer, and he said this. He said, because, he said, we need to do what my Heavenly Father wants us to do. That's called being obedient. And sometimes obedience is difficult. And some of us struggle, don't we, sometimes with that, particularly if we've been asked to do something that we don't want to do, and then we just try to do something different, and that's disobedience. And Jesus said, but my Father said, I must be baptized. And therefore, John, doesn't matter what arguments you put up, doesn't matter the fact that you think, and he was right, that Jesus is more righteous than John was. He said, that's irrelevant. I must be baptized because my Father says so. And so he was obedient and was baptized. So there's a good reason. Jesus himself was baptized, and therefore we follow in his footsteps in the same way. And if Jesus needed to be baptized, there's no excuse for anybody else either. Let's go on to our next slide. Because another reason that we baptize is because Jesus sent us to baptize others. And just before Jesus went back into heaven, having spent some time on this earth, he gathered his closest disciples together and he said, I want you to go out into the world and to make disciples. Make more disciples. You are disciples. He said, I want you to go and make more of them. Make copies of yourselves. And in that way, he said, I want you to do this. He said, I want you to baptize these new disciples. You're to baptize them. And he said, you're then to teach them to follow all my instructions. And so that's something that Jesus told us to do. And so we've gone on ever since, baptizing people and saying when people say, I want to follow Jesus, just as Jesus was baptized, just as he told us to do it, we say part of that is to go and be baptized. Normally we're baptized at the start of our Christian walk with Christ. By that we mean the moment we decide to say, yes, I really am going to follow Jesus. That's usually the time, but sometimes it can be a bit later too. So there's a couple of reasons why we baptize today. Let's go on. Baptism is a picture, and we were looking at some pictures earlier, weren't we? We saw a picture of Little Red Riding Hood, and as soon as you saw the picture, you knew the story. And you saw a picture of Jack and the Beanstalk, and as soon as you saw the picture, you knew the story. And I guess most of us here, if I had just shown you the picture and said, now tell me the story of that picture, you could have told me from beginning to end the whole story. No problem at all. And in a similar way, baptism does the same thing. Baptism actually tells a story, but it tells the story of the good news that Jesus came to bring. And so whenever we see someone being baptized, it should remind us of that story. But let's have a look at a couple of the pictures that we see when someone's being... Alan, in a few moments' time, is going to be baptized. And when he's baptized, I want you to see these things that are going on. Let's go on to our next picture. Dead people need to be buried. Dead people need to be buried. Now, this is kind of appropriate as Alan is a gravedigger. But there was no pun really intended on that. But dead people need to be buried. And you see, what happens is that there is the life that I am who I am. And we say that old life dies. The old me is gone. And we're dead to sin. And sin is really anything that is offensive to God. Any of our actions that cause him displeasure, and that's sin. And so we're dead to sin. And by that we mean we don't do it anymore. And so when Alan is baptized, he's going to go down in the water. And I want you to imagine that water is just like a grave. That's a horrible thought, actually, isn't it? But we have to think of that for a moment. And what's going to happen is that Alan is going to go down under the water just like we bury a person. And that's the picture that the old life has been buried because it died the old way. Let's hope it doesn't stop there. Let's go on to the next picture. New life is born. Exactly, that's right. And so just as Alan goes under the water to show us a picture of a dead person being buried, as he comes out of the water, it's to show us a new life. Jesus died. He was nailed to the cross and they buried him in a tomb. And then 3 days later, on the third day, he came back to life again. And we get new life in Jesus. And he says, the old life might be gone, but he says, don't worry about that because I'm going to give you something new. And it's a new life in me. And we're going to take on all the images of Jesus, the pictures, the characteristics of Jesus in our new life. We're going to be just like him. And that's our aim in our new life with Jesus, is that we try to become more and more like Jesus every day. And it's not always easy, and sometimes we do things that are wrong still, and we slide backwards a little bit. But it's okay. He forgives us for those things, and we continue to make that life just like Jesus' life. So we see him as being our role model. Now, sometimes we have different ideas of people we'd like to be like. And so often on our television screens, we have lots of people trying to be like others, particularly in these competitions that we seem to get endless amounts of on our TV screens. And there's so many you can see as they get up to sing, where they're copying, Beyonce or somebody or other. They're copying somebody. Well, what we do as Christians is we copy Jesus. And so we read about his life, we try to learn more about it, and we try to say, now, how can I be just like that? How can I put Jesus' way of life into my way of life? So that's what we're trying to do. So a new life is born, and so as Alan comes out of the water, we just remember then a new life. Just like a baby being born, there's a new life. There's a third picture that I want you to think about. Because dirty people need a bath. Okay? Dirty people need a bath. And it does look a bit like a bath, doesn't it? Do you think it looks a bit like a bath over here? It's sort of a cross between a bath and a swimming pool, isn't it? So, but dirty people need a bath. And in a sense, that what we have here is a bath in front of us. And that's because we get dirty, but not with mud from outside. And if we go playing outside, the chances are we're going to come in all muddy, aren't we? But it's not that type of mud, but it's more the case that there are things that we do wrong in our lives that spoil us, that make us dirty people in that respect. Well, in baptism, here is a picture of someone who's getting clean again. And so that's a really important picture for us to remember, that it's a cleansing, it's making us washed and clean once again. And it's always good to be clean, isn't it? There's nothing worse than going around feeling dirty. Sometimes, we can feel dirty. Sometimes you might be somewhere and you can sense somebody else isn't very clean. It's not a nice feeling. But with Jesus, he cleans us, and once and for all. And that's the amazing thing. Now, I know that probably when I was a child, if I'd realised this, I would have sort of wanted this, it's a bit like the living water that Jesus gave to the woman at the well. Do you remember? And Jesus said, if you drink this water, you'll never thirst again. If I could find a bath where I never needed the bath again, that would have been wonderful. But the truth is that this is the bath. But actually, these are just pictures. And a picture isn't real. That's rather concerning. Because a picture, it helps us to see something. But what it helps us to see is something beyond the picture. And what Alan does today, as he goes into the water, is it's not actually anything special about that water. It's just ordinary Thames water. Nothing special about it. We haven't done anything particularly to the water. We haven't blessed the water or anything like that. It's just water. The pool itself, there's nothing special about it. These are just pictures. But there is something very special that's going on. Because this picture tells us the story of something real that has happened in Alan's life. That he's going to say, and he's going to tell us his story for himself in a few moments, but he's going to tell us really that there was an old life that's now gone, it's dead, and it needed burying. There was a new life that was born, and so he became a new person in Jesus. And that all the old dirt from an old way of life and all the things that we did wrong, that's been washed away, and now Jesus keeps us clean in that way. And so it's really, really simple what's going on here, and yet so important as well. And it's good to have that picture, because when we see that picture, it's a reminder not just to ourselves, but to others as well. Now, I often say that baptism is important for, for the people who are watching. It's always a good visual reminder of what Jesus has done for us. It's also a good thing for the person being baptized. And I would say to you, Alan, that you can think about your baptism as an anchor point in your life. Because sometimes we get doubts about our faith. And sometimes we think, was it real? Particularly when things start going wrong in our lives, or we're going through a tough time with our faith. And we might doubt a little bit, and we say, was it real? Did I really follow Jesus? Well, you know, this day is a day that you can always look back to, Alan, and say, yeah, that's the day when I publicly told all these people here that I'm a follower of Jesus. It's very difficult when you've said something publicly to go back on it. Very difficult, isn't it? And so it's a good anchor point for us to look back and to say, yeah, I really meant it. And that's because it takes a lot of guts to go into baptism. Only brave people can do it. Because it's something that we, naturally we get very nervous about these sort of things. So, as I say, it's not an easy thing for Alan to do today, and it's taken a lot of courage for him to do that. Now, only someone who's serious about their faith is going to have the courage to say, yeah, I want to do this in front of all these people, and to tell them that I want to follow Jesus. So that's really what baptism is all about. And so as we see it a little bit later, I want you to remember those three simple things. Let's see if we can remind ourselves again of those. We're going to take it off the screen now because we don't want you guessing. So let's have a think about the pictures. What's the first picture that we're going to see? When Alan is baptised, what does it remind us of? This is why we need pictures. Because words are difficult to remember, aren't they? What does it remind us of? What do you think, Lucia? Jack and the Beanstalk. Well, that picture was certainly... That was the first picture. That was the first picture, wasn't it? That's right. So, and I'm glad something's sticking. Hannah. Sorry. Being buried. That's right. The first one was a dead person needs to be buried, doesn't it? Okay, let's just remind ourselves with that picture on the screen again. So, a dead person needs to be buried. That's the first picture we're going to see as Alan goes under the water. Okay, so what was the second picture that we're going to be reminded of? A dead person's buried, what happens next? A baby, that's right, a new life. So as he comes out of the water, there's a new life. And the third picture? Third one. Who can remember? What do you think, Onsa? The bath. That's right. Okay. Because dirty people need a bath. So that's right. So it's those three things. I want you to remember those as that happens. Okay. And it's a picture of what's actually happened in Alan's life.